Welcome to session 226 of the Bible in a Year commentary. If you started the series on the 1st of January, then today should be the 14th of August. Today we'll be looking at 2 Chronicles 9 to 12 and Psalm 71. But so far in 1st and 2nd Chronicles, we've read through the introductory genealogies, King David's reign, and started King Solomon's reign. While separate books in our Bible, 1st and 2nd Chronicles tell one story, giving a recap of the Old Testament from Adam to the Jews' return from exile. We read through the opening chapters of the book dedicated to the genealogies of God's people. These covered from Adam to David, focusing on Judah, the tribe of the royal family, Levi, the tribe of the priests, and Benjamin, the tribe of the first king Saul. There were also genealogies for the people who returned from exile. As we moved into the section of the book focused on David, we saw the author use David as a model for what an ideal future king would look like. David was described as a shepherd of God's people and a military ruler who united the tribes, led them to defeat their enemies, and established peace. He built up God's city and brought God's presence in. He served in part as a priest. There were parallels with Moses as David prepared the design for the temple, gathered its resources, and organised the Levites and the priests. David encouraged Solomon as Moses did for Joshua. When the people were suffering, his desire was to take on this suffering himself. In all of this, David modelled what an ideal king should be. Turning to his son, David did everything he could to set Solomon up well. He then stepped back to allow Solomon to be king. Starting 2 Chronicles, Solomon immediately set himself apart from the other kings, asking God not for wealth or power, but wisdom. Because of this, God granted Solomon the wisdom that he asked for and the wealth and success that he hadn't. Solomon gathered the remaining resources for the temple and then had it built. He brought in all the gold dedicated to God and the Ark of the Covenant. When the Ark was finally placed in the centre of the temple, the Holy of Holies, a cloud of God's presence fell upon the temple. Solomon then prayed for the people and the temple. He asked God to never forget his people and to forgive them if they turned again to his temple and repented. Once Solomon had finished, fire fell down from heaven to fill the temple. God had heard Solomon's prayer and answered it. He told Solomon that as long as his people remained humble and repented of their sin, God would forgive and rescue them. But if they don't, God will cast them from the land and destroy this temple. Solomon then went on to build more cities and establish trade routes. So let's jump in with today's reading, 2 Chronicles 9 to 12. God gave Solomon favour in every area of his life. Not only did God give him good relationships with his neighbours, he also gave him such a great reputation that spread much further. The Queen of Sheba had heard of Solomon's greatness. Sheba is roughly where modern-day Yemen is, and so was a fair trek. The Queen came to test Solomon to see if the fame of his wisdom was as incredible as she'd heard. Not only did Solomon answer all of her questions, but when she saw the state of his court and his kingdom, the queen was lost for words. She praises the God of the Israelites for blessing them and their king with such wisdom. She and other kings gave Solomon great gifts, but Solomon outdid them all with the gifts that he gave back. Solomon soon became fabulously wealthy, with gold, silver, and wild animals. He became the king that all the other kings would come to spend time in his presence and learn from. In many ways, Solomon was a king over all other kings. Eventually, Solomon passed away and was replaced by his son Rehoboam. This leads us to the final section of 1st and 2nd Chronicles, focused on the kings of Judah from Rehoboam all the way through to the exile. These will also serve as case studies of what a king should and shouldn't do. All Israel came to make Rehoboam king, including a man named Jeroboam, who had fled to Egypt because of disagreements with Solomon. There, they asked Rehoboam how he planned to lead. Yes, Solomon had produced great wealth for the kingdom, but he had also worked the people pretty hard. They wanted to know if Rehoboam was going to be kinder to them. He asked them for 3 days to think through their request. His father's old advisors suggested that Rehoboam give the people what they want so that they'll be loyal to him forever. But Rehoboam's friends told him to make a show of strength, telling the people he would treat them harder than his father had. Unfortunately, Rehoboam listened to his friends and told the people that he would work them extra hard. At that, all the tribes, apart from Judah and Benjamin, left and went back up north. They set up their own nation, claiming they were the true Israelites, and made Jeroboam their king. Jeroboam didn't trust the Levites or priests, so he got rid of them, making his own priests. Because of this, the Levites and priests went south to join Judah and Benjamin, known just as Judah. As king of Judah in the south, Rehoboam did all right to begin with. He established strong, fortified cities and grew a family for himself. But he soon began to turn away from God, and God removed his protection from the land. Egypt came to sack Judah, and Rehoboam realized the error of his ways. He humbled himself and repented to God. God saved Judah from complete destruction. But to make it clear how serious an issue this was, God allowed the Egyptians to come into Jerusalem itself and raid the temple and the palace. Rehoboam replaced the golden artifacts that were stolen with bronze ones and stored them in the guard room when they weren't being used. Then Rehoboam passed away and his son Abijah took his place. But that is 2 Chronicles 9 to 12. But now let's look at Psalm 71. This psalm isn't attributed to anyone particular. This has caused some to assume it is to be read along with Psalm 70 as one psalm. This psalm falls into the category of lament psalm. Here's a summary of the structure, but I would recommend checking out the written version of this commentary in the description to see the structure properly for yourself. But we start with verses 1 to 4, the request. Verse 5 to 9, declaration of trust. Verse 10 to 11, the complaint. Verse 12 to 13, the request. And verses 14 to 24, the declaration of trust. The psalmist opens with their request. They ask that God rescue them and be their security. This is followed by a declaration of trust. God has looked after and cared for them ever since they were young. They have a whole lifetime of praise and joy to tell others about. But then the complaint comes. They have enemies who claim God has abandoned the psalmist, and no one will stop them if they use this as an opportunity to defeat them. And so the psalmist asks God to not forsake them like their enemies claim. Instead, may their enemies be put to shame for their wickedness. At that, the psalmist turns back to praise for the rest of the psalm. The psalmist will tell others of all that God has done for them. Again, the psalmist praises God, for he has been good to them since their youth up to their old age. He is a righteous God, and while he has allowed the psalmist to see difficult times, he will restore the psalmist and strengthen them. All this means that the psalmist will sing God's praises and tell everyone of God's righteousness. The psalmist shows us the wisdom that comes with old age. While they might be suffering now, they have a whole lifetime of stories and memories to draw on that God is good and he will rescue his people. Thanks for joining us today. Take a moment to reflect on what you've read and share your thoughts or questions below. If you're watching in the future, then you can click here for the next session, or you can find the full playlist just down here. To receive these daily commentaries in your email inbox, subscribe via the link in the description below. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.